This is the first plenary of the conference. It is dedicated to the questions around the US left. For some strange reason, someone thought that a Greek would be a good moderator for a very long conference. I suppose this is some idea of impartiality, but anyway. We are very glad to have with us three comrades who have both theoretical contribution, public presence, and impeccable activism. Malik Jabali, Wolff, and Wolff. Now, the form of the discussion will be the following. First of all, they will introduce themselves. 1 minute of basically basic information about them. Then they will speak, but they will speak, not just speak, they will answer each one a question related to the general thematic of the panel, but specific, let's say, to each one of them. Each answer will be, let's say, up to 10 minutes. This will give us then ample time for discussion, okay, from the floor, but also give the opportunity to the speakers also to respond to the question and experience shows that the dialogue part of the Q&A part of a presentation is always sometimes more important and more lively and more interesting than the first presentation. Okay, without further ado, I ask Malaika, Jared, and then Richard Wolff to introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. My name is Malik Jabali, and I've got a few things going on. So I'm a journalist primarily. I'm an author of a book called It's Not You, It's Capitalism, Why It's Time to Break Up and How to Move On. And before I got into journalism, I was a public policy attorney for the New York City Council for about 7 years. So a lot of my work has been thinking about solutions to myriad problems that are happening in capitalist economies. And I would say even before that, I think the most important thing is that I was a movement baby. I have wanted to figure out how to bridge the gap between all this rhetoric and this deep thinking that we have in the movement and connect it with everyday people's consciousness. So I grew up in the Malcolm X grassroots movement. People might be familiar with that. It started off, it has its roots in the Midwest with the Republic of New Africa. Then they moved down south where I was raised in Atlanta. They saw that there was an opportunity for Black people to be politically organized so that we can actually have freedom in America and independence and liberation, but it came with socialist tenets. And that was my worldview. Like, that was what I knew. To me, free the land was like saying hello. It was very common for us. I was a new African Scout instead of a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout. We talked about the Republic of New Africa in these southern states in the South. And then as I got older, I realized that was not very common for Black people or even anywhere in the United States. So I think a large part of my work has been in normalizing these ideas that we think are radical, or things that are considered radical, and making them common for everyday people because they are intimately impacted by the vulgarity of capitalism, but they often don't have a language for it, they don't recognize it, they just think that they need to advance within a capitalist economy. So with that said, I decided to be a journalist and be able to have that language to be able to talk to people in just an everyday common way. I became the senior news and politics editor at Essence Magazine. It's a Black lifestyle magazine. We normally talk about, Mary J. Blige and a lot of, celebrities, but I was like, let's platform radical Black politics is something that does not happen a lot in Black media. So with that, I was able to profile Robin Kelly, folks like Dr. Sharice Burden-Stelly, folks like the Barons, Charles and Inez Barron, to be able to make it plain and palatable and approachable for people. So that's basically my work, and I'll move on. I know we said 2 minutes, so that's what I got.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good evening, everybody. My name is Jared Ball. I'm very happy to be here. Among many other things, I'm a father and a husband, professor of Africana and Media Studies at Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland, a historically black college and university, which comes with its own set of contradictions and struggles and strifes. I'm a supporter of any number of grassroots organizations, from the All African People's Revolutionary Party, the Movement Builders, Black Alliance for Peace, and I have been involved in supporting that form of grassroots organization for a long time, and media work that supports that kind of organization encourages it. In fact, my show, my website, my social media handle, I Mix What I Like, is an honorific to Steve Biko. I write what I like, with the idea of spreading Black consciousness and revolution through media work, and it was just born out of the originating project Free Mix Radio, blending the mixtape with that sort of emancipatory journalistic purpose, hence creating I Mix What I Like for the 21st century. That's sort of the ethic and the politics I try to bring into all the work that I do. It's an honor to be here, and I look forward to the build. Thank you very much.
Oh, can everyone hear me? All right, good. I know many of you, so it's a little bit redundant. Stay with me for 3 minutes, I'll take for this. I was born in Youngstown, Ohio. At the time I was born, my father worked in the Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company, which was a steel factory at that time. That's a little misleading because my mother and father were immigrants. They weren't Americans. They came from Europe, running away from the fascism that we clearly now see followed them. And they came to the United States, and they had nothing, no money. They didn't speak English, and all the usual. My father got a job in the steel factory. But if you're the first child, as I was, of immigrants, you sort of have to make it up to them. Their lives, career-wise, pretty much ended. And so my mother had been a university student, my father had been a lawyer, and they lived through me. I had to make it in the United States, and I worked real hard not to disappoint them. And as a result, I went to all the right schools here in the United States because I was told that this is the way that you make it in this country if your name isn't Rockefeller or something like that, which mine wasn't. My father, however, left me a legacy besides the fact that we had no money. My father had been a radical in Europe, my mother also, so I am what I think is called here a red diaper baby, or something like that. And my father particularly had been part of the Frankfurt Institute. Those of you who study that, the man who brought him into that, a man named Max Horkheimer, remained a friend of most of my parents' lives. And that connected them to Magdoff and Sweezy in the Monthly Review here in the United States. And I grew up in that framework. Unfortunately, when I went to the university here, there was not only no Marxism, but at that time, horrible anti-Marxist everything. And I began to realize that I wouldn't learn what I wanted to learn in American universities unless I did it on my own. And not only that, I had to learn it on my own with a few other students who shared this perspective, very few faculty. And I had to hide it from the faculty because it would get me in trouble if I didn't. I learned that lesson. But I went to the right universities, Harvard, Stanford, and Yale, the 3 places I went to. And in America, in case you didn't know this, if you go to those universities, you don't want for jobs for the rest of your life. May not be exactly the job you want, but you will get a job, and others will be intimidated by your credential. So here I am, a Marxist, and happy to be so, probably happier now than I was 10 years ago, and I was already then happier than I was 10 years before that. And I've been able to be a professor because of the universities I attended, in spite of my Marxism. I taught at the City College here, I taught at Yale,
I taught at the University of Massachusetts, and I now am a visiting professor at the New School University here in New York City. I also started a radio program about 12 years ago on WBAI here in New York, gave me an opportunity. And I developed this program called Economic Update that I know some of you at least have seen. We are now broadcast every week on about 100 radio stations, and we go out to millions of homes on television, YouTube, and all the rest of it. I have about 400,000 YouTube followers. And I teach Marxism. That's all I do. Every week, one way or another, that's what I do. And we have an organization called Democracy at Work, which produces all kinds of videos, it does all kinds of programs. And I'm very pleased to tell you that the response is extraordinary. And I tell you that because if any of you worry that being a radical in the United States today is something you can't do, or it's too hard to do, or it's too unrewarded, everything I've just told you is designed to get you to think otherwise. This is the best conditions given the brief summary I've given you of my life, these are the best conditions to do what I'm trying to do in the United States than I have ever had in my life. Please understand that, because that's the question we're all going to be dealing with. What are the prospects of the left in this country? And I want to start telling you now that my brief presentation after Malaika and Jared give theirs will be to flesh out why I think that and why I hope you pick up that message. Thank you.
Okay, so many thanks for the introductions. So, Malaika, you're first, and the question is very simple. How do you envision a radical left movement in the United States from the perspective of your generation? And in a particular conjunction that many have described as a kind of decline of US hegemony. So, this is the question.
Well, I'll start off by saying it's kind of interesting we're having this conversation. I was telling Professor Wolff this earlier, but the last time I was involved in any kind of left forum thing was exactly 5 years ago in this very room where we grappled with this question. And I don't know if I am more or less optimistic as Professor Wolff is. I think when we were having this conversation in 2019, it was kind of like at the beginning of what I would call the Bernie years. And since then, so about 5 years later, I think there is a lot of opportunity, but I'm scared a lot. I think being someone who works in mainstream media, or I had worked in mainstream media, and I see the kind of propaganda and literature that people are engaging with, we lost, I think, some of that radical edge a little bit. I'm looking at the media that people are reading. I have to look at data, or I have to look at data for my work. And so much of what we tried to push were these sort of radical narratives and radical ideas. And I think a lot of people are tired. A lot of people are burnt out. There was a lot of fervor and excitement to see a national political project. And then I think when that dissipated in 2020, when we saw Joe Biden get elected, folks lost a little bit of that, I think, potential, and instead it has gotten lost into, I talked about this before on his show, they've gotten lost into various other wars, gender wars, thinking about sex and racism. And so people are blaming a lot of other people for their problems instead of thinking about having solidarity and working with each other for a political project. And so as a millennial, I mean, for me, it was really impactful to see the beginning of the fall of Wall Street. I was studying securities deregulation at Columbia Law School, and when we saw all of that happen with the Great Recession, I ended up graduating during the Great Recession. I was taking this class as, all of these big banks were falling apart. And so, like that, with Occupy Wall Street, we had a moment. And then because of US hegemony, because of its commitment to maintaining capitalism, I think people were led astray a little bit. And so I'm excited for the opportunity for us to be able to grab that. I think there are people who still remain, who would be excited about a political project. And this time for me, I feel is so dire and necessary because folks are getting lost in the dark web. They're getting lost thinking about Andrew Tate. They're getting lost, looking at red pill content. They're getting lost with, again, like a lot of this stuff on social media. But at the same time, we have new images and we've democratized media in a way where people might be radicalized by Palestine. They might be radicalized by seeing what our capitalist government is doing. They might be radicalized seeing that Joe Biden is sending billions of dollars to Ukraine and billions of dollars to Israel while we have people suffering and while we have encampments here that are being attacked by police, that we have the same kind of police state that's attacking Palestinians, that's attacking folks back home in Atlanta where I'm from, where we have those kinds of relationships with Cop City and the Israeli Defense Fund. And so, Defense Forces, excuse me. And so people see those contradictions and they see those relationships, but how do we actually mobilize them into political activity, I think, is the issue that I'm grappling with. And so I'm still trying to figure out the question myself. It's hard for me to say what the left is, what our vision is when I'm still trying to understand it. I'm trying to understand, what does the left even look like? Are we just talking about political ideals? I think that is a big aspect of it. People who have the potential and they recognize the failures of capitalism. Right now, Black people, for instance, 60% of them have a positive, they have a positive connotation to the term socialism. But what exactly does that mean? They're about a little bit more than half of Black people feel positive associations to the word capitalism. But what does that mean, and how do we make the most of that? So if we are looking at potential for these left ideas, I think there's so much there because people can see it with their eyes. They can see it on TikTok. They can see it on Twitter. They feel it in their pockets. They see that wages aren't keeping up with production. They see that they're having to work 3 and 4 jobs just to make a living. They see that we have Amazon and all these gig companies that are making money off of their labor, and they're not able to save for retirement. So I think people see it, but how do we actually make them care enough to want to join a political project, to join left institutions, to be a part of left organizing? That's the work that I'm in. And I'm in I would say my early baby phase of leftism, trying to organize people. So I look forward to hearing from the panelists here who can give me some insight as well as to what they have been observing. So there is opportunity, I think, especially in radicalizing people. That's the focus of my work. I think there's even more work to do in terms of getting our political institutions to be able to appeal to enough everyday people to want to join them. So what do political institutions look like in a ideal left world? I think it means us having more electoral power. It's growing, and I think we need to build on that. I think it means we need to have more community land trusts. How do we fund that? I think we need more electoral power. But also, how do we have more electoral power when you've got these, this two-party system that is saying, vote or die, genocide, or you lose your civil rights? Folks don't really feel like there are viable options for them. And so many people are losing hope in the system. They're losing hope in the Democratic Party. They're losing hope in the two-party system in general. But then what do we do with that? So I think there's a lot of opportunity, but it's going to take a massive amount of organizing. a mass amount of getting out into the streets, getting to people's homes, finding the institutions where we can cultivate that kind of work so that folks aren't just lost on the internet and get lost looking at Andrew Tate when they need to be thinking about Kwame Nkrumah and Angela Davis and Kathleen Cleaver. We need to put more of that information in front of them so they have somewhere to go with the disappointment that they're feeling.
Okay. Jared, apart from your work and your activism, has been also an attempt to, let's say, deconstruct the possibility of, a kind of black capitalism as a way to black liberation. For example, the title of your famous book, Myth and Propaganda of the Black Power. So how can we start from this point, this deconstruction, this engagement, and see that as a starting point for a left perspective in the US that can also be the answer to the question about black migration?
Thank you. So we'll start with where I ended a moment ago. A lot of the work that has inspired me from Steve Biko and his brand of journalism was to create a form of media that would inspire, initially, Black South Africans into some sort of rebellion against apartheid. And my work has always wanted to follow that mission. And I admit with the most recent work on buying power, really it's my most subdued public political effort, in the sense that my initial attempt was the hope that if I could suppress an overt discussion of what my politics actually are, I could get audiences to focus just on this particular mythology, with the hope that once we smash this mythology, we could move to and putting our energy to more substantive solutions. The point of buying power, just very quickly for those unfamiliar, is this persistent idea, and I was just reading it's now being applied more and more to Asians and Latin Americans with the same purpose. But the point of buying power is a marketing and advertising phrase that's supposed to help advertisers target their ad revenue, in this case, to Black audiences, with the hope that those audiences will hear the advertising and buy the product. This is a subset of the broader mission, particularly since the Second World War, which was the goal of which was to replace Black radical organizing, ideology, and activism with something more suitable to the corporate and political ruling elite, which is, of course, the fantasy of Black capitalism. And as I often have tried to joke, particularly to my mostly working class Black audience and students, is that it doesn't sound effective, but the attempt is that one quick clue to the fallacy of mythology is that the greatest critic the world has ever known, or critics the world has ever known of capitalism, came from white men, one of whom actually came from some money in Europe, talking specifically and almost exclusively to white people, saying capitalism doesn't work. So the idea that after accumulating all of the land and wealth and enslaving and genociding, that they would then confer the solution onto their formerly colonized and enslaved population of saying, just start your own businesses and circulate your dollar and you can catch up, on its face should be easily dismissed. But that's the problem, that in this hyper counterinsurgent psychological warfare media environment that most of my students have only known. Now we think of the Marshall McLuhan quote: "We don't know who discovered water, but we know it was not the fish, because an all-pervasive environment is always beyond perception." So these students grow up and they're watching the Black versions of Andrew Tate, which is, again, it's actually a good parallel, because Andrew Tate is to the manosphere what Black capitalism is to Black economics, in the sense that Black people follow Andrew Tate's white supremacist male patriarchy and put a Black spin on it and present that to Black audiences as a solution. claiming that this is a revolutionary approach. Black capitalism functions in much the same way. It's an ethic, it's an ideal that is the most white, most conservative, most reactionary ideology or worldview, but it's wrapped in this often well-presented, beautiful blackness with billions of dollars and an algorithm and all kinds of advertising support to promote this idea. And as we're learning more and more about, with the specific goal of this being, again, a tactic to move Black people away from radical political organization. Where I think I messed up is that I think it's a mistake. I think, to what Rick was just saying a moment ago, this is a better time to be more overt and more aggressive. So my own biggest critique of my own most recent work is that it's too soft. It's left too many people confused about what my actual points are, and then they're able to misinterpret the work or have it misinterpreted for them and present it back to them as if Jared is just anti-Black business and therefore he should be dismissed. Oh, no, he doesn't. And it's remarkable to watch how much, I don't have this experience ever before, how much is said about me and my work by people who have not actually read it. It's a fascinating moment, which I think is a subset of this broader problem, that we live in so on the one hand, I think Rick is right, and I can't wait for him to come back up here and smash what I'm about to say. But on the other hand, I struggle with this because, yes, this may be the easiest time to convince others that we need a more left critique and movement, but the media environment has been so meticulously evolved that even now, while genocide is in high gear, there is still, even as Greenblatt goes publicly and says we're losing the battle for the messaging, there is still this residue, this foundation of you can't go beyond the Democratic Party. You can't go beyond the New York Times. You can't go beyond maybe The Nation magazine or, God forbid, Jacobin. You can't go left of them. Oh, no. So what ends up happening is people, and I would argue because of the aftermath of Bernie Sanders and his complete misrepresentation of socialism, we have this idea that was almost there. And if we vote for Biden one more time, just one more time, stop fascism one more time, we'll get there. And underneath that, underneath the billions that Act Blue spreads around, that the left wing of the ruling elite spreads around, underneath the algorithms that automatically push certain narratives favorable to advertising and marketing, underneath that is the very real counterinsurgency. Shout out to Millennials Are Killing Capitalism and Dr. Dylan Rodriguez and others who are really promoting this, the state's counterinsurgency manuals, use and co-optations of symbols and messaging. They're very explicit. Take a symbol of, in this case, Black radicalism and twist it into a capitalist fantasy that everyone knows can't work. How did how did wealth get accumulated in the first place? Violence, enslavement, genocide, and then you turn around and again tell the descendants of those victims to do what no one else has done to accumulate the wealth that they currently have. And it's very successful. And the more I'm trying to study it and pay attention to how the messaging works, it evolves out of K Street and Wall Street and whatever else street, and it trickles down. He's been in the news a lot lately, so I've been using this in the pop culture a lot more lately. So I've been using this commercial in my class again because it's maybe a year or two old at this point. But Kendrick Lamar, he may have beat Drake. I'm not mad at that, although I wasn't, solidarity, half Black Jews, you know what I'm saying? He may have beat Drake. But let's not forget that this is the man who did the Cash App commercial, just as one example. Did you all see that commercial? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. I mean, you can't even front on it. You have this brother, obviously from the hood. You see him he's just talking to Kendrick, and he's like, wow, I'm gonna do this, wow, using all the street language, wow. And everybody, you're supposed to be struggling to hold, what is he really talking about? And the camera pulls back, you see he's talking to Kendrick. And then Kendrick says, oh, I got you. And he turns to someone you don't see on camera just yet. He's saying, what he's really trying to say is that he's trying to use his power. And you start speaking to him, and then you pull back, you see the white man. Is he the CEO of Cash App? Probably. And he's standing there, and then he translates back to Kendrick the financial literacy that is just lacking in the Black community. And were they more financially literate, all the freedom is right there, because capitalism provides it. Just all these financially illiterate Black folks just don't know how to, but don't know how to get it. So then Kendrick breaks it, and the white man distills his wisdom through Kendrick, who turns to the brothers and breaks it down and all this treat the African-American vernacular English. So that the brother can, and it's the perfect symbolic example of the work that I'm trying to condemn. It is the most white conservative analysis distilled through the most talented Black voices and faces to Black audiences who come to my classes and then tell me, you don't know what you're talking about. I watched Earn Your Leisure last week. I watched $1 million worth of game last week. I watched this platform and that platform, all of whom are gathering to spread the fantasy, which I'll start by saying does not come from collective political work. So what we end up getting is individual messages from individual relative success stories who are lying to Black audiences about how they even got there. One of my favorite examples of that is when Steve Harvey is on Earn Your Leisure pontificating about how investment can work and this can work, and if you just work the system and be financially literate. And I'm like, wait a minute. You slept in the car getting your routines together for comedy clubs. You got in movies and hosted game shows. That's how you made whatever. You wrote silly books about gender and relationships as you get divorced and get caught in all kinds, whatever else was being claimed in terms of this abuse of labor and work, all this other. That's how you got to where you are. But then you come before this unwitting Black audience looking for your wisdom and tell them, no, invest in crypto. Oh, well, that's because what I meant to tell you, you're supposed to diversify and have had your money in real estate. Oh, but you didn't hear that when that collapsed? That's because you didn't have money in gold or AI. So my point is, so really what I'm just saying is that I struggle with where I find the optimism is in the immediate reaction, the overt, the visceral reaction that people have when they are confronted with what's happening in Gaza, when they're confronted with what's happening in their community. There is this, no one needs this deep analysis to understand things are messed up. Where the analysis is necessary is at the level of solutions. We have Oprah-descended public relations experts making Black movies and Netflix specials. Do you know Ava DuVernay erased Kwame Ture from Selma? That would be like erasing Richard Wolff from the People's Forum as you make a movie about the People's Forum. And this is where our history is coming from. And then when it's not from her, we're getting it from Disney. We're getting it from the Obamas, who have now left the White House and opened up a whole movie production so that they can constantly tell us about the nonsensical versions of that produce them. So we desperately need the work and the analyses that are coming out of spaces like these. We definitely need more. I'll close here by saying we should think more carefully about what Daruba bin Wahad has been calling for. A united front that if it gathers nowhere else electorally to stop sending people back to the lessers of evil and start developing actual alternative options for electoral politics, which seems to be the easiest entry point to get people. After all of the analysis, people ultimately still are conditioned to want to hear, well, who are you going to vote for? All right, fine, well, we have a candidate for you. I have my little after party concept we can talk about, but whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, that's what I would like to see us advocating. More aggressive overt unity that materializes and manifests in actual organizational overt public efforts like voting. And it would be great if out of this we could come together with this united front of candidates that we would want to promote and invite people to get into the deeper levels of analysis and radical and militant organizing that has to happen off camera and off mics and away from some of the more public gatherings. But That's it. That's it.
Many, many thanks. Okay, Rick. You know, when Rick has already basically said the question he's going to answer, but let me rephrase it. I mean, you know, when you were introducing yourself, I was thinking, I mean, I came of political age in the mid-1980s. So second half of the 1980s, we would read books, like your books, we're trying to be good Marxists, in particular good adversarial. And we would say, look at these guys. Not only they write good books, but they had the chance to have lived an era, well, you know, to build a left side meant something. It was strong. And for many years, I thought, well, we were the generation of defeat. The wilderness of the 1990s, 2000s, yeah, some movements, and then, you know, mid-2010 or something. And it all ended up in one debacle or the other. I mean, I come from Greece. Greece is, you know, almost synonymous now with how the left can do anything wrong when it has the possibility to do something really right. So please try and convince me that now, in the aftermath of that wave of defeats, and one could think of the Sanders defeat, one could think of the Corbyn generation defeat, etc. Please convince me why now is a better time.
I'm going to set aside what I had planned on talking because I've been fascinated and struck by both what Malaika and Jared have said. I was going to talk to you about how impressed I have been over the last few years, agreeing that we had a dark time in the 80s and 90s and so on, because I do think that we have been treated to a remarkable set of initiatives, mass left-wing initiatives. And I want to list them and then I want to put them aside. In December of 2021, a very tiny group of baristas in a Starbucks in Buffalo, New York, decided, even though the wisdom of the labor movement was, cannot organize that. There were thousands of Starbucks at that time, none of them had a union. So a group in Buffalo, tiny group, said we're going to try anyway. Okay, December 2021, it's really 2.5 years, not much. As of this morning, because I checked, 425 Starbucks have voted union. There are now 10,500 Starbucks workers unionized. And so powerful has that been that the corporation changed its mind and has now begun to sit down and negotiate contracts, which before they refused to do. That is, for the labor movement we all know and love and despair about for the last 40 years, an amazing achievement. As is the election in both the Teamsters Union and in the United Auto Workers of very different leaderships from what they have had for a very long time. If you have not yet listened to Sean Fain, listen. What's coming out of his mouth is not what we have heard before. That's no guarantee as to what will happen. I'm not want to sugarcoat this, but we are watching the labor movement do things it has not done before. And that's very, very important. We also saw an outpouring, complicated, I know, around the BLM, the Black Lives Matter movement, that is also remarkable in the terms of the emotion it stirred, the numbers of people that got involved, the intensity of commitment. The Me Too movement among women particularly, also very remarkable. And then in recent weeks, we have seen tens of thousands of college students stand up around this Palestine-Gaza catastrophe and act against the wishes of their universities, suffer the calling of police by cowardly university professors and administrators even more, and not be beaten down, come back as strong or stronger. And in the last few days, I have begun to get emails, because we get a lot when you run a radio and TV program, from the high school students that are now following the college students and beginning to organize themselves. So we are seeing a lot of initiative in a lot of different venues, so that Jared's idea of bringing together a political movement is a very good idea whose time is with us now. Having said that, let me put that aside. Every ruling elite in the history of the world has sooner or later come to understand that one of the bases of their dominance is to convince the people they dominate that they are so strong and so powerful that any effort to break with them is doomed to failure. That is a way to control your people, those under you. And it's really important, as I'm now going to take 5 minutes to do, to try to demonstrate, as every revolutionary always had to, sooner or later, that much of this dominance is phony. Much of it is made up. And it's endless repetition, as Malaika poetically told us in the media, is part of how you get that to be believed, the endless repetition. So let me tell you about how the capitalism we're all worried about is not strong. And American capitalism in particular is weak. It's dying. The American empire is over. Let me begin with a couple of things just to settle it in your mind. There used to be the United States and its allies that dominated the world. After World War II, all the potential competitors were wiped out. Germany, Japan, France, Italy, Germany, Spain, whoever you might look at, wiped out by the war. The United States emerged, other than Pearl Harbor, no bomb fell. No war took place. Better than that, the war put the unemployed depression era, fixed it. Half the unemployed was put in a uniform, and the other half were put to work making the uniform. And that solved the unemployment problem. Now, Americans don't know that, and that leads them to make terrible mistakes. For example, they didn't understand that putting Russia on a war footing in Ukraine would be the best thing that could happen to the Russian economy, and it has been thriving ever since. President Biden told us the ruble would collapse. Didn't come close. The Europeans told us the Russians would be on their knees. Russia this year is growing faster than the United States. It's been wonderful for Russia. The only thing better for Russia than what happened to its economy is the fact that it has won the war in Ukraine. I understand you and I live in a country where none of this can be spoken. But check the numbers. That's my job. Everything I'm telling you is correct. But I've just begun. Once upon a time, the United States was dominant. Now it's the United States and its allies that became dominant. The G7. United States, Canada, Japan, Britain, France, Italy, and Germany. The G7. Any third world country that had a problem with its trade, with its investment, with its borrowing, with its hope to develop a medical system or an education system would go to Washington or London or Paris to beg and to hope that they could get something. Nowadays, they have an option. They don't have to go to Washington and London. They can go to Beijing and New Delhi. And not only can they, that's where they're going. Economists have a measure called the GDP, gross domestic product. Total output of goods and services in one calendar year. That's all that means. If you add up the total GDP of the G7, United States and its allies, it adds up right now to about 29% of the total output of goods and services per year on this planet. Now we do the same thing for China and its allies. China and its allies has a name called the BRICS. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, to which 6 other countries joined a few months ago. You add up the GDP of all them, it's not 29% of world output. It's 33% of world output. They are the biggest bloc in the world economy. The American dominance is done. It's over, and it's not coming back. In 2020, the GDPs of the 2 power blocs were about equal. Now the United States and its allies are down a bit, 29%, and the others, the BRICS, about 33%. And the gap keeps widening. That's a more important foundational fact for everything that's going on in the world than anything else I can think of. And it's not just because I'm an economist. I'm going to give you 2 examples right from the present. Example number 1. Russia moves into Ukraine, contesting the Donbass area, the border between them. The Europeans now becoming complete lapdogs to the United States because there's nothing for them. It's either China or the United States, Europe, trying to figure out how to play the role of not second fiddle, 18th fiddle. Very humiliating for them. And you can understand why they need to pretend that they're still a very important power. And if you want real amusement, follow Mr. Macron, who is the greatest clown the Europeans have right now. And what comes out of his mouth is so absurd that you can enjoy it. You can have a moment of levity once you forget for the moment how desperate their situation is. So the United States leads the fight back. It's going to give Ukraine all the weapons that they can possibly use, or to be more accurate, try to use, and all the money that they can try to not get lost to thievery, which has always been a problem in the Ukraine. And then they made the calculation, we can win this war, despite the fact that Russia is 10 times the size of Ukraine, more or less, by sanctioning Russia. We, the powerful capitalist West, will scold the Russians. We won't buy your oil and gas, and that's what you depend on. So they wouldn't. And they didn't think it through. They didn't think they needed to. They had been so powerful for so long that they could do things like this and not think through whether this will work this time. They assumed it'll work this time because it worked ever since 1945. But the game has changed, and with it, the rules. BRICS saved Russia. To make a long story short, it simply stopped selling oil and gas to Europe and sold them instead to India and China. Problem solved. With it, Russia turns and becomes an Asian nation. Bye-bye, Europe. Who suffers the most from what Russia does? Europe. And who leads the suffering? Germany, who used to dominate Europe. Why? Because they had all that cheap energy from Russia, which they don't have anymore. They have to buy expensive liquefied natural gas from the United States. Wow. Germany, done. Europe, done. Powerhouse, don't be silly. 6 months ago, they had to tell Mr. Zelensky that they can't ship him any more shells because they don't have any. They've run out. What? The big capitalist power of the world, US and Europe combined, can't scrounge up shells? Turns out not only can they not scrounge them up, but it'll take years to produce what the Russians already have. Oh my goodness. All that power, all that strength, disappearing. 15 years ago, the central banks of the world kept 80 or more % of their reserves, what backs their currency, by holding US dollars, which is where the phrase comes from, a dollar is as good as gold. Now it's between 40 and 45%. The dollar isn't the world's currency anymore. And the going bet as to who the next one is the Chinese yuan. Just as the United States dollar replaced the British pound from the earlier century, the baton, if that's the right word, is passing. And look at the miscalculation in Israel-Palestine. The president says we're 100% behind, and then looks around and realizes there's nobody else there. He's all alone. How strong is NATO? Well, let's see. Ireland, Norway, and Spain just decided last week to recognize Palestine as a state, which they had not done before. There are 195 nations members of the UN. 146 out of 195 have now recognized Palestine as a state. You're losing over there, and by you I mean the United States and Israel. Not because of somebody doing something right or wrong or bad, but the world is changing. There's nothing in it for most of the people in the world to line up with the losing United States or the Israelis who are held up by the United States. And that's changing every calculation. Everywhere in the world, in every country, including this one, people are scratching their heads and saying, whoa, maybe we better change our policies in relationship to China and India, and we don't want to be frozen out of that opportunity. Tony Blinken goes to China or Janet Yellen and gives them lectures as if we were the powerhouse we once were. But Jamie Dimon doesn't give them lectures. He gets down on his knees and begs not to be pushed out of where the growth is. China is now the biggest economy in the world, and it's growing faster than anybody else. General Motors produces and sells more cars in China than it does here. Is it an American company? They're not so sure. And who's they? The General Motors Board of Directors, because it's looking at where its bread is buttered, and it's not where it was before. I could go on, but I think you're getting the picture. The United States is desperately trying to hold on. And I mean the word desperate, because it shows weakness. Over the last 4 days, and I don't mean to scare you, but you're adults. Over the last 4 days, we have gotten closer to World War III than at any point in my lifetime, which means your lifetime. The United States and Europe decided to authorize Ukraine to use long-range missiles that go about 500 kilometers and to shoot them into Russia. Putin has explained that if that happens, one of two things will be done by Russia. And he's been consistent in saying these sorts of things and following up. They demand a buffer zone. If you're going to give them 500-kilometer weapons, then the buffer zone has to be 500 kilometers west of the boundary between Russia and Ukraine. In other words, that's what the Russians will now take. That, for those of you who don't know your geography, that includes the city of Kiev, which now have to become a Russian village, so that there aren't weapons. And the second thing the Russians say may be their choice is to look upon that as a hostile act of a hostile power, the United States and Europe, and that will entitle the Russians to retaliate against European and US targets. That's you and me and New York, which the Russians have more than an ample supply of missiles to deal with. That's not the sign of a power that's in charge. That's not the behavior of a dominant hegemon. That's the behavior of someone who knows somewhere that they're losing their position and are becoming desperate, trying on the one hand to deny it, and on the other to hope something saves them. They have escalated the war in Iraq over and over again. For those of you who don't remember, they were not going to give them Abrams tanks. They gave them. They were not going to give them F-16s. They gave them. They were not going to give them it each time. Not Putin. They've done that. They've escalated because the alternative is to lose that war. Please, therefore, look at the initiatives Black Lives Matter, of the union movement taking up, of the students beginning to lead. Look at the strength that shows, and stop being held back by an illusionary attempt by the ventriloquists in Washington to hope that you don't notice the things I just went through, and there are dozens more. This is a shifting global situation. Everybody else in the world knows it, is talking about it, is adjusting to it. Here the effort is to keep the bluff going. Deny it left, right, and center. Act as if we were in the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, and pretend that unlike every other empire in the history of the world, this one will be born, develop, and not die, even though all the others were born, develop, and die. That kind of claim, which is what we get, is the sign of a power that's disappearing. They can't do it. They're coming to terms with China now, because what are they going to do? Have a war over Taiwan at the same time that Israel is fighting with the Palestinians and the Ukraine war is in this limbo crazy place? No, they can't. Last point. When I got my PhD in economics, I had a classmate, and I've said this on the radio, and I find that people are so taken by it that I have to tell you the story again, and my apologies to those of you who've heard me do this before. I had a classmate. The graduate class at Yale was very small, with about 15 students, so you got to know everybody. And I remember sitting in a class with our best teacher, a man named James Tobin. Some of you know, got a Nobel Prize in economics later. And in those days, there were very few women who took courses in economics, particularly at the graduate level. So we had, like, I don't know, 12 or 13 males, of which I was one, and 2 women. And all the males, of course, were interested in these women. Not about economics and other subjects which I implement. And so we got to know them a little bit. One of the 2 women was Janet Yellen. So I know what she knows in economics, because literally we were in the same room with the same teacher reading the same books all the time. She learned what I learned. I learned what she learned. She knows what's going on, but she can't say it. And so she doesn't. So she's a constant reminder. When I see her on TV or in the newspaper, she's a constant reminder. Either she's a spectacular actress and she showed no such aptitude back then, or she's been drinking a lot of the Kool-Aid. And she is having to tell the story. And she tells it reasonably well because she believes it too. Don't you be fooled. It'll hold us back from doing what my previous speakers have told us is what they want to see, and I share with them pretty much 100% what they said. This is the right time for us to try. Or let's put it this way, it's as good a time as we're likely to see. And it would be a shame and a critique of ourselves if we don't move now. If Mr. Trump becomes the next president, he may have advisors who have figured this out too. And they will need to make sure that that weakness, which they will have to take over, will not become the Achilles heel that people like us will take advantage of. So we better be careful. And the best way to be careful is to build up our strength as fast as we know how to take care of this situation and not let the bravado fool us into thinking we can't do it. I think we can, and I think there's a lot of evidence accumulating all around this country that the left in this country really is a sleeping giant. And it's time for us to try to wake it up. It's already happening, so we don't have to start it, we just have to join it and help build it. And you are the kinds of people to whom this message is most importantly directed. Thank you.
Okay, so we go into, so it's time for the audience to ask the questions, not me. I suggest we take a first round of questions. Please, questions. I know, the temptation to make presentations from the floor is strong. And but please try also to be a question. So, comrade, please raise your hand, please. And also, it's always better if we identify ourselves when we're asking the question.
My name is Bryce Patterson. I'm a local activist from West Philadelphia. I am Orthodox Marxist, and I just wanted to present a question to all of you, including Professor Wolff. I wanted to kind of ask about the range of power that you think that specifically, because I'm not talking about the government of the United States or the bureaucratic layer. I'm more concerned about the power and control that capitalists of the United States retain, and given the range of their wealth and the control of productive forces, do you think that they, the capitalist class solely, particularly in the West, deem themselves truly a threat from the power? Because my concern is that they have no concern about the daily lives of working class people or people like ourselves. I don't think that they see their own position truly a threat, even though that there is a threat. And my second part of that question is, do you think that their desire to corner and control like the global market is strong enough that they would be willing to vaporize all things in their path, including leading to a war of maximum exasperation in order to destroy their eastern company?
Many thanks. Any other questions? Yes, please.
Yeah, my name is Monwood, and I'm in Richmond, Virginia, and doing a lot of organizing, a lot of union stuff, but also Palestine. liberation work. And I'm sure we've all seen, right, the protests are not just here in the United States, but around the world. Not just college students, but large groups of persons. And a lot of the language of the protests here in the United States, for sure, but I know also in Europe, is anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, very much identifying class interests at work. So my question is really just about what your thoughts are on the potential of this energy and the international kinds of collaborations that are happening to evolve into something like an international revolutionary class project, working class project.
Thanks. Any other questions? Yes, Comrade.
Yeah, my name's David. I am just one quick question. I think it might be more simple for the guy already has. Why is it that minority men are becoming like more conservative, bigger supporters of Trump, that Trump kind of views as going to win this election with minority men? Why is that so?
Okay, any other questions, please, Congress?
Maybe let me
Three is enough. Please,
Let's take
We're gonna forget what the problem is. Where to start? Well, I know the question was directed to you in terms of minority men, but I've been doing research on Black working class voters, I would say, for the past 7 or 8 years. I'm grappling with that question, and I think it is a little bit overstated. So I think we take it for granted that they are voting for Trump. I think for a lot of Black voters across the board, including Black men, many of them are opting out of the system altogether. So I relocated to Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where we see a lot of Black voter disenfranchisement, but also a lot of resistance to the two-party system is happening, maybe more so than anywhere else in the country. And I go door to door. I talk to Black men. I go to barbershops. I go to convenience stores. And they have seen so much abandonment in their communities that they're not really thinking about Trump or Biden. They're saying none of them work for us. And Milwaukee, for instance, or I would say the state of Wisconsin, had the sharpest decline in Black voter turnout between 2016 and 2020, or 2012 and 2016 than anywhere else in the country. Then I went back and looked at the data for 2020, and people talk about, Black people, they're saving democracy, they're getting behind Joe Biden. The numbers are even lower in 2020 in Black neighborhoods. So there is an element for sure of Black men who I think, like what the professor has said, who there is this conflation, I think, with kind of Black nationalists, Black nationalists and self-determination politics with being an entrepreneur. And so they are drawn to Trump being this, patriarchal figure who's a businessman, and they can align with that. So some of that is happening, but definitely not at the rate that the media has propagandized us to believe it's happening, and I think that's for a reason. They want us to believe that the only two options is the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, and Black voters volleying between them both, when most Black people are either becoming independent or not voting at all.
If I may, I think that's a near perfect answer. I would only want to add that I have to admit, I bristle at the use of the word minority. When we're talking about representatives of the world majority populations, and we're talking about people who represent what stands against the only real minority that exists in this world that should ever be identified, which is rich white men. So but then I would also just want to say very quickly, to the extent, and I think Malaika is exactly right in terms of the overblown nature of all of this, and this tendency to want to blame Black voters for the loss of Democrats who themselves have abandoned any group of people they've claimed to represent and should not get any of our votes anyway. They don't deserve it. So there's a logic to that. Then there is, as I mentioned briefly, there is a tremendous, to the extent that we all can use popular media for our work, the right is much more well-funded and organized and supported and resourced to do that work. So I was just on a call earlier today, this morning, where a very black radical organizer was confessing that his own relatives, one of them in particular, is caught up on 4chan. A black man in 2024 getting messaging about the world from 4chan, which is bananas. Then you get that burn your leisures, and again, all the podcasts I was talking about, these folks are tacitly encouraging a rightward shift, even as they just recently partnered with Kamala Harris. But then there's an overture. Remember, the Republican Party has always said we want 5% of the black vote. That's it. That's their victory goal. That's what they're always trying to get, just that. So all of these things, I think, are factors as to why you will see a handful moving in that direction. They're being encouraged, they're being invited to it, and there's a lot. And then very quickly to the brother, you raised a question just a minute ago. I just want to say I slightly disagree. I'm very interested in what my co-panelists have to say. When people like the billionaire Nick Hanauer are doing their national tours talking about to other billionaires, we have to redistribute just a little bit because the working people who can't afford to buy the products that they're making and enriching us are going to rebel against us, I think they are a little bit worried. When the military is doing war games in 2018 to prepare for an uprising of Gen Z that are not going to get the promises, I think they are worried. They're just preparing with the cop cities that are popping up all over the country. It's not just in Atlanta, it's in Baltimore and an HBCU. Cop states, I think my colleague Renee Johnson said that there's like 47 cop cities evolving or planned as we speak. So the 1033 program on my campus is funding the police and increased security guards with more militarized weaponry and more police, because they know that while Morgan State may be getting an influx of students and funding, the surrounding East Baltimore is further collapsing. And so they know we're not helping you. So they know you're going to come looking for us. So put up more gates, put up more cameras, get more police. The cybersecurity intelligence complex that Barrett Brown talks about, they're suppressing information everywhere. They are terrified of the power that is represented in this room. The only thing they have keeping us from organizing and becoming the threat that we should be is, I think, a media narrative that is so pervasive and dominant in psychological warfare effective. So I do think that we are a threat. They are aware. That's not good. Oh, I'm sorry. Did I misunderstood you? And just take what I said as a bit of information or a thought. But I thought I heard that before. I apologize.
You want it? Unless we got the question.
Well, you would like to.
No, I was going to ask if you could restate it because I was giving a little.
So when I said that they're like concerned about the working class, I'm not talking about like the concern of the threat we can pose. I mean, that's exactly what the police are for. They're trying to arrest this process if we do rise up. What I am talking about is them not being concerned if we're turned to ash as they attempt to destroy their adversaries so that they can corner the party. That's what
Let me respond a little bit. I stressed before that the American system, the American empire, American capitalism is in the worst shape I've seen it in my lifetime. And even in the past, when there have been crises, I could see where they did this and this and this, they could probably wiggle out. I don't see that now. But I want to stress, and I would say the same thing about the business community or the employer class, or whatever you want to call them. They are also very divided. They can't escape the weakness of this empire. They're hooked into it. Let me give you a couple of examples. The biggest American corporations, the mega corporations, whose names you all know, spent the last 30 years pouring hundreds of billions of dollars into China to set up production facilities there, either on their own or in partnerships with Chinese government agencies and with private capitalists in China, because their economy is roughly split 50-50, state-owned and operated and private. They don't want to lose that investment. They made that investment in order to produce in China because the wages were much lower than they would have to pay here. And because China is the biggest, fastest growing market in the world. And if you go to business school and you get an MBA, What you learn after much money and much time is that if you want to succeed as a capitalist, go where the wages are low and the market is growing, because that's the right place to be. And so they like good students do, they did what their teachers told them and they went to China, planning to send all that stuff that they used to make in Cincinnati or Philadelphia back here where the market is still big and they're well known and make a killing, which they did. The boom in the stock market in the 1980s and 90s and into this century is all about that. They made a killing. They suddenly replaced expensive workers with cheap workers and still could sell everything. They raked it in. Okay? They don't want tariffs raised by Mr. Biden because they can't ship their junk back to the United States without being taxed. The Chinese now make, for those of you who don't know, the best electric vehicles in the world at the lowest price. Nobody can compete with them. In Europe already, you see Chinese electric cars all over the roads. Why don't you see them? Because we've had a 27.5% tariff, which Mr. Biden raised last week to 100%. That means a $30,000, using dollars, you could say if I did it in yuan, a $30,000 car made in China and shipped to France cost the French $30,000. Shipped to the United States would cost us $60,000, that same car. Therefore, you don't see it. Well, we're going to all buy American-made electric cars, which would have cost $30,000, but now that they're protected, it will be $55,000. They'll make a fortune off of that. This sounds wonderful. And the sad reality is the American working class thinks this is a good idea because it protects the jobs of Americans making these lower quality electric vehicles. But of course, that's a mistake. Why? Because every country in the world is buying $30,000 trucks. Americans can't get a $30,000 truck. So an American company competing with a French company loses because the French company can get a truck for $30,000 and Americans can't. And that will lose us jobs way more than got saved in our dying automobile industry. There is no way out. The companies don't know what to do. They have to go with our government because they need that government. It buys half the cars anyway. So they can't go against the government, but they don't want to go with the government because they get screwed either way. That's a sign of weakness. They have no solution to this problem. Trump didn't provide a solution. Here's an index. We were having a growing gap between rich and poor starting back in the 1970s. It has continued uninterrupted. It lasted right through the Trump administration. He did nothing to change that. It got worse in the pandemic. They did nothing to change it. And it's gotten worse across 4 years of Mr. Biden. Did nothing. These underlying conditions are hamstringing them. They can't solve the problem. They can't even prevent an inflation, which is half the thing that's irritating the American working class, what you have to spend to fill up your grocery bag at the supermarket. They can't figure out what to do with that. They raise interest rates, don't solve the problem anymore. They don't know where to turn. In that situation, and I think this answers the question, in that situation, what does the left do? What we can't do is get lost in the weeds of their problem. Are we going to argue raising interest rates more, lower the one? Stop. That's not what we're here for. Raise the tariff, lower the tariff. What? We have to come up with something that is a general solution while we ridicule their being lost in not knowing which way to go or what to do. And some of you know what I do. I advocate for a radical reorganization of the economy. And basically, it's the end of the capitalist class. We don't need them. They are not solving the problems of our society. They're making them worse. They have no solution. We have one. Democratizing enterprise. Real simple. The enterprise needs to be a community where we democratically decide what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the profits. That's a democratically decided issue. No longer will a small group of people run every enterprise and the rest of us be employees. The US Census keeps a track. What percentage of the American population are employers? Answer, 3. That's the number given by the US Census. The other 97%, look at each other, are us. But we permit 3% to make all the decisions in every enterprise. Let's take inflation. Because if you want an example of mystified confusion, there it is. An inflation means in economics a general rise in prices. That's all it means. An inflation is when prices generally go up, some more, some less, doesn't matter, just generally. Okay, let's pursue this. Who decides the price of everything? Answer, employers. Most of you are employees. Tell me how many times you've been called into an office by your boss and asked to consult on what the prices should be or whatever it is you don't make. Answer, never. Never happened, not gonna happen. 3% of the people set the prices. They decide whether they go up, whether they go down, whether they stay the same. The other 97% pay. 3%, guess what? It's going to shock you. Those 3% decide when to raise prices. Therefore, an inflation is their fault. And why do they do it? Well, remember the business school. Business school teaches people, raise the price if and when it improves your profits. If it doesn't improve your profits, don't do it. This complexity is explained over a semester. You give them an exam, and they usually do pretty well. That's it. So we know why we have an inflation. It's good for profits. It's good for profits. And therefore, the system isn't going to solve this problem. We've had higher interest rates now for quite a while. Don't solve the problem because the business community wants to do this thing. But here comes the contradiction. That's worsening the mass feeling about this economy. It's building our constituents, which is the last thing on earth they want to do. What else are they going to do? They're not going to sacrifice their own profits. Nobody ever told them to do that in business school. They're not doing it. We have them. They don't know what to do. It's so gross. One last thing I can't resist. It's so gross that the Federal Reserve, and I won't ask for you to raise your hands if you haven't thought about this, don't worry. The Federal Reserve acted over the last 2.5 years as if the only thing that could be done for an inflation was to raise interest rates. Even though for the mass of people, that makes the problem worse. Because in addition to paying more for your Rice Krispies, you pay a higher interest on your credit card that you use to buy the damn Rice Krispies. It's worse. Why would you accept this? Why would you allow the theater, we must raise the interest rates, as if that were the only way to deal with an inflation? That's crazy. The last time we dealt with an inflation like this was in 1971. The then president, Republican conservative crook, sound familiar, Nixon, got on the television, August 15, 1971, and said, we have a terrible inflation. I'm going to do something about it, I promise. And he said, here's what I'm going to do. As of tomorrow morning, if you're a business and you raise the price of anything, we will come for you, we will arrest you, and we will throw you in jail. And if you're a union and you push for higher wages, we'll do the same. Wage price freeze. Well-known, full of descriptions in the textbooks read by Janet Yellen, as well as me. We all know that that was an alternative. How was it discussed in the Federal Reserve? Not a word. How was it handled by the President of the United States? Not a word. How many of you know any of it? We decided to raise interest rates knowing full well that it was an inferior way to deal with inflation. But it pleased the people who run this society. And they did it. And it has made the mass of people more hostile to capitalism, which they are now, because of what we do, associating with inflation and with economic trouble. As in all revolutionary periods, the people who run the show are complicit in the rise of the revolutionary movement, not because they want to, but because they have no alternative.
Okay, so we still have time for one or two questions. Well, that's not exactly one or two.
Shut her hand up.
That's a lot. Okay, so, okay, let's start. Yes?
Hear him.
Oh, you can. But please, very
Brief, okay.
brief questions and brief answers.
Okay. My name is Gordon Barnes. I'm a professor at the University of Washington, also a communist. More inclined to speak and not ask a question, but I will ask three questions, one to each panelist. For Richard, you pointed out that the new leadership in UAW and Teamsters is something exciting. Sean Fain endorsed Biden. What do we make of that? The Teamsters leadership has met with Trump, they met with Biden. The union bureaucracy still supports the capitalist class and need to be reckoned with. So I don't find it as exciting as usual. That would be nice. And also, another question to Richard, relative to the decline of the U.S. empire, I would agree that it's been challenged via BRICS. And if you want to talk about multipolarity, that would be great. Michael Roberts pointed out that 85 to 95% of forex exchanges were in the U.S. dollar. Michael Roberts pointed out that 85 to 90% of forex trading is still in the U.S. dollar. So if you could address that, please. To Jared, relative to the question on sort of the end of your talk, relative to electoral politics and having met in front, I would characterize that as a popular front. So, you might not vote for Democrats, you might not vote for Republicans, there are still other capitalist elements. And is that the angle that we're going for? Certainly not my angle. So what is the angle if we're having a sort of united front to break away from the two-party system? It's not just a two-party system, it's a capitalist system. There are other capitalists. So if you could address that, please. And then for Malaika, this is sort of related to Jared. You talked about sort of the left political project and the left institution. Fundamentally, what I think we need is a party. We need a working class revolutionary party because from what I've seen on the panel, the question of the panel is there a left in the United States? I would say yes, there is, on its preference. And we need a revolutionary solution to the crisis in our capitalist. Thank you.
So,
I would like to hear, Rihanna Subianto, CUNY College. I wanna hear Jared and Malaika in conversation with concern, how you respond to each other's concern. So Jared and Malaika versus Richard. So Richard, it's a very eye-opening facts and data and all that, but we live in a psychological media war full of misinformation. I mean, how do we organize the left in time of digital media, corporatized, full of misinformation, hegemonic media, right? So how do we think about it? I don't think we should leave this room without answering that, which is your concern, Jeff.
Thank you. Professor Wolff, I really appreciated your analysis on the possibilities that come from the rise of the BRICS, but I kind of oscillate on what I think the potentialities are with that, because we know that Russia obviously isn't the Soviet Union. So if we're just talking like in terms of workers' power, we were, for example, just in Cuba, where obviously the situation is very dire, especially without like a superpower kind of standing behind Cuba. So what is the potential for socialism? Really, we know with China, with the Silk Road, some countries are getting good deals, some aren't, it kind of depends. That internationally and domestically, I agree with you, but also what I'm wondering, I'm not trying to be a hater, but how much power are we really getting in organizing Starbucks workers? You know, what does that mean for the capitalist production change? But I would love to talk more about it. Thank you.
Okay, so I think we're good from the
Your question is, I think, far more complicated and will take a little bit more time on that. I wanted to take a little bit of time I have to quickly respond. I agree. So if I wasn't clear, I was rushing. I don't want to build a party that's at all reformist or supportive of any capitalism at all. So initially my call was to support what I was saying, called United Front, Popular Front, whatever it is to say, if you are running an electoral political party or a current campaign that claims to be anti-capitalist, that they should unite, specifically the Green Party, Cornell West, and the Party for Socialism and Liberation should evolve to create that kind of party. But my after-party concept, we don't dive into now, is exactly along the same lines. I think you're describing. So I'm not at all interested in all being associated with anything involving any promotion of capitalism in any form.
Greens are capitalists.
I'm sorry?
Greens are capitalists.
Actually, that's not true. They've moved away from that, and we would want to encourage that moving beyond it. They've actually adopted a socialist platform. So, again, I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm just saying if there's going to be electoral options, there should be a move to galvanize what exists as election.
And I feel like these two questions are actually kind of compatible. So in terms of what I envision for everyday people, it is to be involved on a local level in some kind of work in their community. I think a lot of times when we have these conversations, because this is a global economic, we're oppressed globally, and so we're always thinking about these huge global solutions and these huge global issues. But we need to talk to neighbors. We need to organize blocks. We need to be block association presidents. We need to be tenant association leaders. So everything doesn't have to be this, Democratic or Republican binary, even thinking about a large national political party. How are we organizing our neighbors? How are we organizing our schools? How are we organizing our workplaces? And so I don't think we're going to get at, American propaganda and these huge cable news companies by trying to find, amass a bunch of wealth to have a left, news program. I think, the Young Turks is one of those. But can we just communicate with the people that we know around us in our church to try and radicalize them? So I think a lot of this work, and I've been the co-chair of an organization called Operation Power that's based in East New York, Brooklyn. I'm now the communications chair. And it is just talking to people that we see every day outside of these left spaces and telling them, hey, I think that we can get our own candidate for this one district. Like, we do not even need to think, a congressional district. You have smaller districts, assembly districts, city council districts. I think we need to do a better job as leftists, as a socialist myself, of having very tangible solutions for people. And I think one of those is very local politics. And you might need to use the Democratic Party line because that's where our people are. We gotta meet our people where they're at. I'm telling you, this is what I mean by using the Democratic Party line. I go to train stations on Utica Avenue, on Bedford Avenue, in wherever you wanna go. You talk to the average Black person who is suffering under capitalism. They might be able to say, my boss is not paying me what they owe me. I'm working 2 jobs. I can't pay the rent, but are you a Democrat? I'm not gonna vote for you if you're not a Democrat. Are you a Republican? Are you trying to take my vote? And so you can use that line. This is what we've done for Charles Barron, for Inez Barron, because our people, if you say that you're a part of another type of party, and we can disagree on that, but we also have to think tactics. They will think that you are a Russian asset, or that you are not really for Black people. We ran a candidate who was aligned with DSA, And Black people in East New York did not vote for him because they thought that he was not really for them. So we have to have conversations with our people to recognize exactly where they are, meet them there, but you're not a part of the Democratic machine. You're not paying dues for the county committee. You're not trying to, at the time, it was, who was the Joe something? He was the Kings County chair for the Democratic Party. You're not buying into the Democratic Party, but you're just telling your people, yeah, they're Democrats, but they're socialists, and this is what they're doing for you. So I think we need to have more conversations with our folks, because we're kind of losing the plot if we stick to just theory.
I'm in the same vein, and I understand the frustration. But the reason Sean Fain is interesting is because of the conversations he makes possible. What he allows people like me and you to do, which people who have been in his position have not allowed us to do. And it's happening all over the labor movement, not just the two examples I gave. Let me give you a better one. 5 years ago, a group of socialists, publicly identified as such, made a concerted effort to run in the elections of the AFL-CIO up and down the state of Vermont. Long story short, they won. And for the last 4 years, the statewide organization of the AFL-CIO in Vermont was owned and operated by self-defined socialists. Mr. Trumka, who before he passed on was the head of the AFL-CIO, suspended them, which he had the right to do. And a fight began, which Mr. Trumka lost. And the socialists still run the AFL-CIO in Vermont. And they're having an easier time now with Sean Fain than they had before. Is it a revolution? No. But it is a very important step breaking and allowing what Malaika says for lots of conversations in lots of workplaces about what all of this means. And that's very important context for the rest of the work people like us have to do. We need that context. Mike is right. The Democratic Party is doing an awful lot of work to be less in the past, but still an awful lot of work that people think they ought to be. And their allegiance to that party is thinner than it has been in a long time. And that gives us opportunities. We should not miss those. We should try. But I also think there are ways to introduce very revolutionary ideas that don't appear, at least at the beginning, to strike people that way. And the one I suggest, and I keep doing that, is to say, imagine if the workplace were run by you. Suppose you were in charge. Suppose the factory, the office, the store, wherever you were, was run as a community by all of you, one person, one vote. And that's how you make the decisions. This is an idea most people have not thought about. The very articulation of it in a conversation makes it 2 steps realer than it was before. For me, I got that idea reading Marx, because I think that's what he meant. Certainly is what I got. That's what he meant. And that's it. Then there are no more capitalists, not because they passed a law or they raised a tax, but because they're not there anymore. There aren't any of them. They are free to join the rest of the workers, one person, one vote. That's it. And we have the power to call that by its proper name, the democratization of the enterprise. We're bringing democracy to the workplace where it should have been long ago.
And that will change people's lives right away. Imagine if you ran your workplace. Then the revolution isn't far away. Then it isn't a question of voting for this one who disappears into City Hall, state legislature, or Washington. Then it's something that makes the revolution transform your life starting tomorrow.
So, I suggest that, first of all, we give up. Doesn't end, and although the real resources of hope are out there in the streets, in the workplaces, in the schools, in the neighborhoods, and although it's obvious that the revolution will not start within the four walls of a conference room, at the same time, we need the conversation, we need the conference room. So see you all tomorrow, 9:30 sharp, please. Let's start early.